Every great story has that turning point in it where like you suddenly realize the stakes are a lot higher than you thought they were, right? Like where you suddenly see that's where this is going. It's the "you are my father" moment in Empire Strikes Back where you go, oh. And if that's a spoiler for you, you had 44 years. That's on you, okay? So this is that moment in Mark's gospel where suddenly there's been this trajectory, things have been moving forward at a steady pace, and something's about to take a radical turn. And it's going to go in a direction that the followers of Jesus at this time, in fact, everyone around him would not have seen coming. This is the shocking moment where all of Mark's gospel pivots. So we read in Mark 8, verse 27, that Jesus and his disciples went up to the villages around Caesarea Philippi, and on the way, he asked them, who do people say I am? Just to review a little bit about where we are, big picture of Mark's gospel, this section is kind of the on the way section. Mark's gospel, a big picture, divides into two major portions. The first half, Mark chapter 1 to 8, is all centered on the question of who is Jesus. Everyone's like, he's going around, he's healing and he's teaching, and the question is, who is he? And it all takes place in the northern region of Israel in a place called Galilee. Okay, so the nation of Israel centers on two big bodies of water, the Sea of Galilee in the north, the Dead Sea in the south, and the south is where Jerusalem is. It's where all of the center of culture is. And the north up in Galilee, that's kind of the backwater area of Israel, right? It's the more rural area. And Jesus is up in the north in Galilee, and he's doing all of his teaching and preaching, and everybody's trying to figure out, who is Jesus? And they're all making their conclusions based on what they see him doing. Now, the second half of the gospel, Mark chapters 11 to 16, are going to focus on the mission of Jesus. What did he come to do? Okay? The first half is all up in Galilee. He's teaching and preaching and healing, and we're trying to figure out who he is. The second half is all in Jerusalem, and it's focused on, so what is the purpose of his being here? What is his mission? What is this all about? And the hinge happens in Mark chapters 8 to 10 on this little journey section in between Galilee in the north and going down to Jerusalem in the south. And so we're going to be in this little section of Mark chapters 8 to 10 for the next couple of weeks. And it's the hinge that moves from the identity of Jesus to the mission of Jesus. And these three chapters are centered around a repetitive pattern. 3 times in Mark chapters 8, 9, and 10, Jesus predicts his death. He said nothing about it for the first 8 chapters. Everything is about the kingdom of God and what God's doing in the world, what God expects of people. It's all about healing and his authority and his power, and he's driving out demons. And suddenly, at this moment, he starts telling his disciples that he's going to die. And each of the 3 times that he does this, the disciples immediately follow up by doing something really, really dumb that shows that they don't get it. And that leads to Jesus having to correct them about the nature of his mission and the nature of discipleship. So just to review, the first half of the gospel all builds to understanding who Jesus is. And Jesus takes that opportunity and says, okay, now that you know who I am, let me tell you about my mission. I came to die. But the disciples can't accept that. And so this middle section in 8, 9, and 10 is all about Jesus reframing for the disciples what it means to be Messiah and what it means to follow him before they go to Jerusalem and him to go to the cross. Doing okay so far in the big structure? Okay, so that's what's happening when we come to chapter 8, verse 27, is we read that he and his disciples have gone up to a place called Caesarea Philippi. Now, Caesarea Philippi is this town up in the very northern part of Israel, and it's I've gotten to go there twice. It's one of the most beautiful places in the country. It's where the spring feeds in that's going to go to the Jordan River. It's absolutely stunning, but it's not primarily a Jewish city at the time of Jesus. Notice the name, Caesarea Philippi. That's named after Caesar, right? And so this Caesarea Philippi is a Roman city. And where the spring comes out of the water, there's this cliff that is filled with all these little niches, all these little carved out sections in the wall. And what each one of those was for holding a little god, a little idol. Okay? And where they had, the way the legend goes is they would have, there's this big cave that went back into where the spring was. And what they would do is they would actually sacrifice people by throwing them off the cliff into the cave. And they would know, based on whether blood ran out of the water, out the spring, whether or not the sacrifice was accepted. Does this sound like a happy, wonderful place? Okay, now Jesus takes his disciples here for this crucial turning point conversation. Why? He's a Jewish rabbi who's been going synagogue to synagogue, teaching them about the Jewish scriptures, and he leaves the Jewish villages behind and goes to a place of pagan worship where they're sacrificing people to gods to have a conversation about his true identity and his mission. In fact, you can take a look at a map here, and you can see Jesus is going to spend a big portion of this 8 to 10 section up here in this northern region, places like Caesarea Philippi and Tyre and Sidon, that are non-Jewish people, outsiders, people from the nations. And he's going to use this area as his teaching center before he goes south to Jerusalem. This should strike us as weird for a Jewish rabbi to have such a significant teaching portion go on up here. It's as if, when you're getting ready for a presidential election and people announce that they're running, they usually try to pick some symbolic place. Maybe it's their hometown. Maybe it's a place that they think is really symbolic of their campaign. Imagine if somebody wanted to run for U.S. president, and so they held a huge rally in London, England, to announce their presidency. You just go, that's an odd choice. You're trying to say something with that choice to literally leave the country to roll out your big plan. What is Jesus doing, leaving the Jewish nation behind and going into the Gentile areas, the places of non-Jewish people in the nations to have this conversation? Possibly, he's sowing the seeds to reframe their idea of his role as being even bigger than the nation of Israel. That he's presenting to them, he's more than just a Jewish king. And he takes them in front of all of these other false gods to have the conversation of who he is. That's the backdrop that he chooses for this momentous conversation in Mark chapter 8. So, in Mark chapter 8, verse 27, Jesus gathers them all together and he asks them a question. Hey, who are the people saying that I am? He's asking them, what's the gossip? They've been walking around together for more than a year, and they've been doing all this healing, and he's been teaching all these messages, and he asked the disciples, okay, so we've been doing this work for a while. What's the word on the street? What are people saying about me? And they reply, well, some say that you're John the Baptist, because John the Baptist, we read, has been killed at this point, so maybe he's John the Baptist reincarnate in some way. Other people say that you're Elijah. There was a famous myth about Elijah because if you read 2 Kings in the Old Testament, Elijah was a prophet who never died. He was taken up by the Lord into heaven. And so many people held that Elijah would physically come back when the Lord restored his kingdom. So thinking, maybe you're Elijah, come back. And still others think you're one of the prophets. So Jesus is softening them up for his question by saying, hey, what are all the people saying about me? And they list all the things that he said. And he says, so what about you? Who do you say I am? And in this incredibly personal moment of confrontation, after Jesus has toured the Jewish countryside, after he's been preaching and ministering, and after you've heard all the words that people would have to say about Jesus, he takes them outside of the safety of Israel to a place where they literally did human sacrifices in front of all the pagan gods, and he asked his disciples, so what are you willing to say about me? Up to this point, Jesus has claimed no name for himself. He has not come out and said what role he plays. He simply let his teaching and his miracles do all the talking for itself. This is actually a pretty vulnerable moment. Can you imagine? You ever have that moment where like somebody asks, they give you a gift and they ask you to guess what it is? Like that's a really dangerous scenario, isn't it? Like if you guess too big, you've just ruined that gift-giving moment, right? So he's putting it out there in front of the disciples saying, so who do you think I am? And surprise, surprise, Peter goes for the gold. He goes, you're the Messiah. This word Messiah, it comes from the Hebrew. The Hebrew word is Mashiach. The Greek word is Christos. It's where we get the word Messiah in Christ. It's the same word with the same meaning. And they have one simple meaning. It actually means, a really crude translation would be the smudged one, right? The idea is it's someone who's had oil and has had it smeared across their forehead to mark them out for a special task. I mean, there's one pop culture reference today that captures this perfectly, and it is little Simba from The Lion King, right? Like that's the exact moment when they mark Simba's forehead at the beginning that he's gonna be the future king. That is exactly what the word Messiah means. So all of Israel, they've been under Roman rule for decades now. They've been under foreign rule for 400 years. And they've been promised that there is a marked out king who is gonna be sent by God to deliver them. And they've been waiting with anticipation. And Peter has the courage to say, I think you're him. I think you're the guy that we've all been waiting for. And then Jesus warns them to tell no one. Can you imagine? Like you've just found out that the person that Israel's been waiting for 400 years is here, and Jesus goes, shh, don't tell anybody. Why would Jesus want to keep this secret? Well, actually, Peter's foolish next words are going to show us why Jesus doesn't want them going public with this message yet. So they have just identified who Jesus is, and so at that moment, based on them naming him Messiah, Jesus decides that they're ready for a new level of teaching. And so verse 31, he says, as he then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. Now, this is shocking on so many levels. The definition of Messiah is supposed to be the king who comes and delivers them from the outsiders, right? Messiah is supposed to be the Jewish king who defeats Rome. And Jesus says, actually, the Messiah is going to be defeated by Jewish rulers. When he lists that group of people, these are the people that would have made up the ruling council in Jerusalem that made the decisions for the nation. The elders were those who were recognized as spiritual leaders. The chief priests were those who ran the temple and the place of sacrifice. And then the teachers of the law were the experts in the scriptures. So you have the government, the priesthood of the temple, and the scholars. The entire ruling class of Israel is going to kill the Messiah. The one whose mission is to deliver Israel from Rome is actually going to be killed by Israel. Everything about this is completely backwards. And then in verse 32, it says he spoke plainly about this. That word is a surprising one for Jesus' teaching. Because if you've read the Gospels much, what is Jesus' teaching style known for? He teaches in parables and riddles. Like he loves to confound people. He loves to look at people who are kind of puzzled by what he said and watch them come back around and ask more questions. And here all of a sudden, Jesus says, hey, no more riddles, no more parables. I'm going to shoot it to you straight. It's time for me to go get killed. He speaks based on them now recognizing who he is. He gives it to them incredibly clearly. And Peter, the brave one, who just a minute ago said, you're the anointed king, takes him aside and begins to rebuke him. Now, think about the contrast there. Who do you say I am? You're the king we've waited for. Hey, Jesus, we need to have a talk. And he pulls him aside and he starts to challenge him and rebuke him. Why? Why does Peter go on this correction? He pulls him aside and he rebukes him. And when Jesus turned, and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and says, "Get behind me, Satan. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." There's an interesting word being used. It's used 3 times in this passage. It's kind of a flexible Greek word that can be translated a couple different ways. But this word for rebuke has happened 3 times. The first time, it actually gets translated as warned in verse 30. We're told that Jesus, we could say, rebuked them to tell no one about him. And then Peter rebukes Jesus because of his teaching, and Jesus rebukes Peter. There's this back and forth going on. This word rebuke is an incredibly strong one. In the rest of the Gospels, its most common use is it's the word Jesus uses. It's the word used to describe what Jesus does to the demons. He rebukes them and kicks them out. And we should feel how odd it is that Jesus, the King, is in the position of giving commands. He warns them not to tell anyone. He rebukes Peter, but in the middle, Peter takes the commanding position and starts rebuking Jesus. This is so far out of line for Peter to do. What led Peter to take such an extreme position of naming someone as God's anointed king and then rebuking him? James Edwards, one New Testament scholar who's written a lot on the Gospel of Mark, says it this way, and I think he's spot on. He says, the explanation that Jesus has given results in bewilderment and dismay, not only because of its implications for messiahship, but equally because of its implications for discipleship. Here's what Edwards is saying. To be a disciple of a rabbi meant that you are, John Mark Comer really likes using the word apprentice, and I think that's really helpful, that you are being apprenticed to your master, which means you're coming alongside them and you're learning to do what they do. One ancient Hebrew tradition was that you should be so close to your rabbi when you're following them that the dust of their shoes is kicking up on your clothes. Where your rabbi goes, you go. You just follow right on their heels. So when Peter, with anticipation, says, Jesus, you're the Messiah, where does he expect his rabbi is going? To victory, to a throne, to a palace. Does that sound like a good path for Peter to be on behind Jesus? Like, Peter just struck gold. I mean, it's like finding out that you signed up with a small startup company that's about to be worth billions and you invested early, right? Like, you made the right call. You threw your lot in with the right person early. So Peter finds out that Jesus is supposed to be the Messiah, and he's like, yes, I apprenticed under the King of the nation. So when Jesus says your rabbi's next step is to be condemned and to die, what are the implications for all of the rabbi's disciples? He just called them on a death mission. And Peter is panicked and furious. You have to imagine a little bit of Peter felt like he just got swindled. Like he went from, I'm going to learn from a rabbi who's going to teach me to be another great teacher, to maybe this rabbi's the king who's going to lead me to a palace, to now this rabbi's calling us all to go die? All of his expectations just got flipped upside down. The next 3 chapters of Mark, Jesus is going to be painting a picture for this upside-down approach to messiahship. The reason I'm convinced that Jesus doesn't want them telling anyone that he's the Messiah is because everyone out there has the same expectation of Messiah, the king who's going to conquer Rome and slaughter their enemies. And Jesus has come to define Messiah in a completely different way. The first 8 chapters of Mark have all been showing that Jesus has the power and authority to rule. And everyone expects that rulers use their power and authority to defeat their enemies and reward their friends. That's what people with power are supposed to do. Now, here's the assumption of everyone in Israel. When our Messiah comes, he will kill our enemies and reward our nation. Which means He's going to kill all those Romans out there. He's going to drive them out, and he's going to lift up Israel. Here's the problem. Their fundamental assumption is wrong about who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. They assume that we Israelites are the good guys, and all those people out there are the bad guys. The thing that Jesus taught that was so incredibly offensive was that everyone, Jew and Gentile alike, were sinful and on the wrong side of God. And they all needed a Savior. If Jesus shows up with his power and authority and cuts down all the enemies of God, he's going to have a kingdom with no citizens. No one is left standing if Jesus comes and slays his enemies. So what is Jesus' path to a kingdom? He's a king who, instead of killing his enemies, is going to die for them. And that is not the kind of Messiah that any of them were expecting. So as a result, he makes his claim about the cross, and then he settles in and he calls the entire crowd together to start to teach them about a different way to live. He says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? What can anyone give in exchange for their soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels. Not only has Jesus taught that this path of laying his life down and going to die is what he's going to do for our salvation, he also says that's the path for everyone who's going to follow me. And there is a really dangerous distortion of the good news of Jesus that's really easy for us to pass around in the church that says something to the effect of Jesus came and died for us so that we wouldn't have to. Now, there's a version of that that's right. Jesus suffered for us so that we could be forgiven, so that we would not be condemned by God, so that we would receive forgiveness and grace. But that can become twisted to say Jesus came and suffered so that I don't have to do anything hard. Jesus came and suffered and died so that I'm now free to live for myself. Jesus offered forgiveness. Jesus offers grace so that there are no demands ever placed on me. And the problem is that Jesus called us not only to trust him, but also to follow him, to do the kinds of things that he does. And the way he describes this here to his followers, he says, I want you to take up your cross, deny yourself, and follow me. And he offers this question: what good would it be for you to gain the entire world and to lose your own soul? The word soul is the word suke. It's the root that gives us our word psychology. It describes the whole of who a person is. And he said, what good would it be to gain everything in the world and to lose yourself? I think what Jesus is acknowledging here is that there is a temptation in every human being to feel a giant hole in their own self, this desperate need for something to be filled. And he says, what good would it be for you to go gain everything that the world has to offer and still have your soul completely lost and empty? Similarly to how Jesus could have come and killed all of his enemies, but he had a kingdom with no citizen, we can chase after everything in the world and have nothing left inside. And humans are remarkably good at seeking to fill the hole in our soul with pleasure, with wealth, with power and significance, and chasing after it all day long. I can tell you, I have many, many weak spots, but one of them is every show that promises you a beautiful home. And right now, Karis is watching a TV show that's set in Hawaii, and the family in it lives in this house that's on this incredible beach. And every time I see that show, every time I wouldn't put words to it this way, but somewhere in my heart, I sincerely believe that if I woke up every morning and walked out my front door to that, my soul would be satisfied. Here's the irony. The United States of America right now, there have been several studies that have come out on this recently. Every single way that you can measure materially human thriving, Western culture in the 21st century is the best life that humans have ever had in the history of the world. Like the access to food and healthcare and security and safety and shelter. Like we have it in the West right now better than any humans in the history of the world have ever had it. You can raise whatever objection you want. Yeah, but what about this in America? Rewind the clock 500 years. We're doing better. Okay? We have it. If you want to talk about the things of the world that you could gain, we have gained more than anyone ever could. And in the midst of that, rates of anxiety, depression, and loneliness are skyrocketing. If you have ever wanted a picture of what it looks like for an entire culture to gain the world and lose their soul, it is American culture right now. We have done it. We have gained the world and lost our soul. And the really dangerous thing is that we would actually try to baptize this in the name of Jesus and tell people that that's what God wants for you. That what God wants for you is to gain his forgiveness and then go chase your own self-actualization in the world. And I'm afraid that the idea of becoming your best self, self-actualization, is the false gospel of our culture right now. And Jesus says something utterly radical. You need to forget about yourself entirely. Quit chasing after it. What is that lie? If only I have a spouse who adores me, then my soul will be satisfied. If only I get the position in the career that I know I will have arrived, then my soul will be satisfied. If only I have beautiful kids that I can love and adore, my soul will be satisfied. If only my parents were proud of me, then my soul will be satisfied. It's all a lie. This isn't about Jesus saying you need to do enough to earn his approval. There is no earning with Jesus. He's full of grace and love, and he gives us all the approval we ever want. He's lovingly telling us, if you chase after it, if you chase after the world, if you defend your rights and fight for yourself, there's a good chance you'll get it. You'll gain everything you're chasing after, and you'll lose your soul in the process. And he is offering us to follow in his example in a radical way and say, I'll take up my cross. I heard it said one time, I don't even remember who said it, but it was some talk I attended when I was a kid. And the preacher said, very few of us are going to be called to die a martyr's death, but every single one of us is called to live a martyr's life. Choosing not to chase after gaining the world, but deny ourselves and follow Jesus. So here's the question I want us to think about tonight in response to Jesus' words. Where have you said yes to Jesus' salvation without saying yes to Jesus' way of life? Where have you said something along the lines of, I know that's Jesus' way of doing things, but that won't work for me in fill in the blank situation? The incredible thing is that Jesus calls us to this way of life because it's actually the way that leads to being deeply loved and known by God. It's actually the way that leads to the great. The irony that when you quit trying to chase after getting yourself filled, that's actually the moment you're going to be the most filled and loved. This fought against every expectation and desire the disciples had. So what we're going to do for the next little bit is I want to encourage you just to spend some time in quiet with the Lord. Ask him, where are you trying to gain the world? Where are you trying to chase after and gain the world and it's leaving you empty? And what would it look like to deny yourself and follow Jesus this week, there's going to be some scriptures on the screen that's just going to remind us who Jesus is, what he's done, and why he is ultimately so satisfying. So spend a little time with the Lord now.